Okay, it's time to bring the horror. Good old Arkham Horror, the role-playing game. So I'll link video to like a previous game video where I talked about like my group and I where we did like a campaign, a horror campaign. We based it on Call of Cthulhu, a different system than this, but this is one way you can bring in like the kind of like the horror of the horror theme as a role-playing game itself and everything. So I have gone over like other things like Von Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, and like I actually talked about like Curse of Strahd as well. So I can link those videos as well in the description. So that's how you can introduce horror into D&D. But this is pure horror game themed whatever, and this is set into the 1920s, which happens to say like we did our Call of Cthulhu campaign in the 1920s, right in like in Massachusetts, and this is where this is situated in like pretty much Arkham, Massachusetts. And of course, these front few pages gets into like the actual world and stuff before we get into the actual rules and stuff. So this talks about like the pretty much like the dice, the rolls, the skills, pretty much like your character creation and how you run the game, in a sense, how you actually run this game and like the type of like a dice system that you're going to be using. So you can see here like with that page the scenes, then we get into like a pretty much structure scenes, like stuff for like the DM type of deal, like ideas on how they can run it, and like gives ideas for players and like, okay, this is what I can do, this is what I get, this is how I roll for that, this is how I do for damage, this is what I do for skill checks and stuff like this. Gets into like basically like injuries too, like basically like this game's versions of hit points. Now like each game is slightly different on how they track like damage. Like in D&D it's hit points, and here you can see it was injuries. So now we get into even more in-depth of like the background, like horror. And you can see like a little damage for like the vehicles and stuff. You get like a horror dice, and like it explains that. You know, like with these videos, it's great. So you can always pause and kind of like, okay, this is what this is all about, and type of deal. So now we could actually get into like his. You can see here with chapter 3, good old character creation, and so like how you would actually create like a character. So now I actually like played like a private investigator in my Call of Cthulhu campaign. So like, and we like had like an educator, we had a journalist, and like we had like kind of like a bootlegging criminal in that campaign. So like I talk about that in the video that I'll be like linking and everything. So as you can see like here with the character creation, like how you pretty much are going to create the type of character that you're actually going to play and everything, and it gives the different classes that you're going to in a sense be able to play. So like themed for like the 1920s and everything. So, and it's slightly different than your typical D&D game, because this is kind of, again, since era Pacific, with being the 1920s. So to think that this is 120 years ago and everything, as my phone is going off. So it seems to be work related, so if it goes off like that. But anyway, here we get into like the kind of like the abilities of the character classes and like the insights and stuff, and like basically like your feats, and then like the actual equipment and stuff that you can use. So like your basically weapons, like your pistols, rifles, and stuff like that in this game. So like it'd be equivalent to like your swords and crossbows and axes and stuff like that in D&D. So you can see like a good picture of like a Tommy gun or a machine gun, a good old knife, and like the different types of like stuff you can like find that you could use as equipment and everything. Or like a weapons, armor, like basically like miscellaneous items, and like I guess like a nice little thread there that you can use as a bookmark. And then you got like magical items, So like and then like tomes. So because like the whole theme of this is kind of like in a sense basically like Call of Cthulhu is pretty much going insane type of deal, but like dealing with like the whole type of horror and everything. So now you actually get into like in chapter 5 here the actual city of Arkham, and it describes that and everything, as you can see like with the good old downtown map and everything, little like a blurb about it and everything. And so this gives you like a good idea of like, okay, this is like the whole town, this is what we're dealing with, this is like the buildings, the type of like organizations that work here, and then the surrounding area with the different cities, like as you can see here, Dunwich, and then Backwood Country, Innsmouth or Innsmouth. However, like my pronunciation is probably always going to suck and everything, so like bear with me. So then like it gets into that town, then it gets into the Kingsport town that's nearby. So talks like all about that. So I think I missed it. Yeah. Then it gets into like the town of Providence. So like pretty much like your main town is Arkham. Within it's got its Arkham Asylum and everything. Sort of like reference to Batman. Now we actually get into like chapter 6 with stuff for like the game master. Pretty much like in a sense like a condensed version of like the D&D dungeon master guide. So it gives you information on like how to like run the pretty much the Arkham horror game. So then you get like you can see here like the different types of tones that you want you can play through and everything. So kind of like a similar type of things that you would find in maybe like Von Richten's guide to like Ravenloft, but this is like it's showcases its own game and everything. So if you want to not necessarily do a D&D horror game, you want to do an actual horror game itself and everything. So now we can see here we get into like the actual like in a sense the dread what the horrors are based on that, and you can see here good old Cthulhu, and it gets into like the old gods like Hastur and like Nyarlathotep, my pronunciation being butchered and everything. So like they're pretty much like the old ones, and so it gets into like the concept of them, like what comes to mind with like the stuff like this is like the stuff that like you could see on like the TV show Stranger Things and everything, like all the monsters that they like face in the what they call the Upside Down and everything. So that could be like a good example of like a horror type of campaign that you could maybe pull from to do something like in here, using this as like your basis and everything. So that's just another idea you could use. So like we're just chugging like right along with these different like dread gods, as you say, or you could say. And now we get into like the chapter 8 of the allies and enemies. So like basically friends and foes, basically people that are going to either help you or hinder you in your good old campaign. So you get like, as you can see, some NPCs that you can use as, like I said, either friends or foes, allies, enemies, whatever. So that's what's good, is that like it has pre-made NPCs for you that you can like as a GM be able to use and not have to sit there like, oh man, I need to make up like a bunch of like NPCs for like the one for this campaign I'm running. Legwork right in here with the NPCs is pretty much already done, and as you can see, there's quite a few of them. So then we get like into chapter 9. So this is like a pretty much like a adventure that you could use to like as an introduction to the actual like Arkham horror game, and so that way you don't necessarily have to make up your own adventure. You have one right here already pre-made for you, so like kind of like a one-shot, so you can do like an introductory one. So that's kind of what like my group and I did, because we've been bouncing around with different systems and everything. So that's kind of like our introduction to that. So, and as you can see, we're pretty much at the end of the book with like different like the index, and then the kit. Of course, you see here the actual character sheet, and so like for like a character creation back in the beginning, and then like as you can see like you can like have different. It has different products too that you can get. Like I'll be going over the board game too that you can kind of incorporate too, and you can see like the different books that you can get as well through like the Aconite books or whatever. So this is like a relatively like a quicker video, so I'll put that right back there. And so on the back you can see like the usual like the description, like, hey, yeah, this is a quick description of what this game is all about and everything. So this is just like a showcase, like, hey, look, like D&D and Pathfinder aren't the only kids on the block, and like you don't necessarily, like I have mentioned Ravenloft, you don't necessarily have to use that to run like a horror themed campaign. So now again, I mentioned that like we my group and we actually didn't use this system. We used like a different system, like I want to say it was the Fate system, but it was based primarily on the Cthulhu horror game and everything. So like, of course, I'm probably mixing the Fate system that we used up with the Star Wars. So because we used the actual Cthulhu game, not this one, but this one kind of like it in a sense, as you could see with the old gods, Cthulhu does make an appearance in this as well. So this is kind of like a different uh, take on the good old like horror genre, and especially with using like H.P. Lovecraft's work. So again, next week I'll actually be going to the board game, and I'll showcase how you can and kind of interconnect each and the role playing game, board game, the role playing game, back and forth and everything. So this week it's all about the actual role playing game book, and this is pretty much all you would need to play this game as well.